Hey team, Mike here, Dr. 40 Fitness and Dr40fitness.ca. You know how I love questions. Man, I love questions. It makes it easy to do YouTube videos when people throw questions and concerns and issues at you. Well, today was no exception. I got an email this time, not a comment on a video, but an email. Here, I'll show it to you. Asia wrote me and said, I've had a bit of a discussion with Althea via messenger, and she shared a bunch of links to studies that she argued proved CPIR and why sweeteners break a fast. Her links were numerous and looked impressive, and there they are. Can you have a look and share your thoughts? Right up my alley. Asia, happy to. But by the way, you know that we're talking about cephalic, meaning the mind-body connection, but a response, an insulinic response to taste. Here's the definition of cephalic, and it means a response just based on taste. All right, so if you taste something sweet, the theory is that if you taste something sweet, your body, your digestion, and insulin are going to react in anticipation of calories, of food. Really a theory, right? Because to date, it's only been proven in a couple of places. It's been proven with calories, so it's proven with sugar. Knowing you can't put sugar on your tongue and swish it around and spit it out and not have an insulinic response. That's a guarantee. Okay. Second, so is saccharin. Right? Hey, I don't have a confirmation bias. I do argue against cephalic phase insulin response, the CPIR response, in everything but saccharin. I don't know how it works. I can't explain it. No one seems to be able to, but saccharin has got a pretty consistent cephalic insulin response. Thank God saccharin isn't available today in any commercial beverage. It is in the pink sweet and low packets, so do yourself a favor. If you're fasting, don't use the pink sweet and low packets. Pretty tough, right? Xylitol has been shown to have a small glycemic response triggering an insulin response. But when it comes to true zero carb, zero calorie, zero glycemic index sugar alcohols and or sweeteners, only saccharin has a proven response. I'm going to prove that to you, okay? So as we go through the studies, by the way, if this is your first time to my channel or you haven't yet, please do me a favor, do subscribe. If you like this content in the keto, low carb, Atkins, or fasting space, I put out 2 or 3 videos a week. You're going to want to know when I get a brainchild like this one, or get prompted, thanks Asia, for a brainchild like this one. And so you get notified, right? So do that for me. Click the bell icon, select all for notifications, and that way you'll know, and you'll always be able to tell by the title if it's of interest to you. All right, so let's get after it. We'll start with, actually what I'm going to do in the interest of time is, as I look through this list, I can see that there's a couple of articles. There's a bunch of studies, but you can see there's one here from healthline.com. That's not a study, that's an article. A little bit further down, sciencedirect.com, and one more at Health at Harvard. So I'm going to leave those ones to the end and go right for the NCBIs and the PubMeds. Asia's topic was specific. All right. Is there an insulin response, a cephalic insulin response? Question number 1 and question number 2 is, will it break a fast? So we're talking about fasting. We're going to go down some rabbit holes in this discussion, and I want you to be as focused as I am on those 2 issues. Right? Is there a cephalic response? Is it proven? And therefore, does it break a fast? All right. That's it. That's all. I don't want to get down, talk about stuff that's irrelevant. We can talk about other topics another time. You can put a question down below of why didn't you talk about this, that, or the other thing. I really want to focus on those 2 issues. So this study here you'll see is in the journal Appetite, is where it was commented on. The study was titled The Effects of Stevia, Aspartame, and Sucrose on Food Intake, Satiety, and Postprandial Glucose and Insulin Levels. Now, just by the title, I can tell you a couple of things. No mention of cephalic, no mention of CPIR, no mention of fasting. However, what there is a mention of is, notice this word, postprandial. The definition of postprandial, I'll show it to you right here, is either with or post. Prandial meaning food. So postprandial meaning after food or after a meal. Well, I can already tell you this study is absolutely irrelevant. Okay, it won't answer either of our first 2 questions. Does it have anything to do with cephalic? Nope. And does it have anything to do with fasting or breaking of fasting? It's with food. It's actually postprandial. It's after food. No. All right, let's take a minute and have a look at the contents anyway, but already irrelevant, okay, to the topic at hand. So the purpose of the study was to test the effects of preloads containing stevia, aspartame, and sucrose, or sugar, sucrose, note that, stevia, aspartame, and sugar, on food intake, satiety, and postprandial glucose and insulin levels. So what were the glucose and insulin levels after food? Let's have a look. 19 healthy lean and 12 obese, a total of 31 individuals, 18 to 50 completed 3 separate food test days, during which they received preloads. So food before the meal, almost like a pre-meal snack. Notice the meal, because it was sweetened with stevia, was only 290 calories. The other meal, because it was sweetened with aspartame, had 290 calories. But the one that didn't have either artificial sweetener or non-cal sweetener that had actual sugar was double at 500 calories before lunch and before dinner. Despite the difference in calories in the preloads, participants did not compensate by eating more at lunch and dinner when they consumed the stevia or the aspartame. So this was often a discussion. Well, it's often suggested that if you drink a Diet Coke to save on the calories, you'll overdo calories later. So this is interesting. This proved that in this study, saving those 200 calories, creating a deficit of 200 calories by using stevia and or aspartame did not result in more food later when they certainly could have eat ad libitum, right, at their choice. Right? Self-reported hunger and satiety levels did not differ. Another common issue that's talked about in social media is, but when I have something with a sweetener in it, I'm ravished, I crave, I'm hungry all the time. Not according to studies, right? So easy to say that, especially those who have an agenda against sweeteners. Oh, but they make me hungry, they make me crave. Okay, well, here's a study with however many people, we just said was in it, 31 people, and the satiety and hunger levels didn't differ, right? Because they didn't know what they had. Right? It's so easy. If one of these people had an agenda and they knew that they were getting either stevia or aspirin, they could have said, "I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry." Okay? Not knowing means they didn't experience it. There was no preconceived ideas that was causing psychosomatic impacts to their decision-making processes, if you will. In either case, our findings suggest that using stevia or aspartame in place of sugar in the diet may be an effective strategy to manage food intake, since hunger and satiety were similar in all 3 conditions. I think at the end of this one, I'm not sure what your takeaway is, but my takeaway is that there really was no downside. In fact, this one didn't actually prove anything to Althea's point about breaking it. So our 2 questions, neither got answered. And what we actually did walk away from this is it's pretty effective to use a sweetener, right, to maintain your caloric deficit. You'll enjoy the taste. You'll enjoy not having hunger and cravings. I call that one for the good guys. Let's move on to study number 2. Study number 2 was reported on in the journal Physiological Behavior from 2017. The title of Althea's second study was the cephalic phase insulin response to nutritive and low-cal sweeteners in solid and beverage form. This is my favorite study by far. This one at least is on sucralose, so it's relevant, and it does test the cephalic phase insulin response to people who are fasting. Let's have a look at this study. All right, 64, overweight and obese. I want to jump ahead for a second and tell you about these people. This study was conducted exclusively over 64, overweight and obese, who were neither restrained eaters nor disordered eaters. Now, let me tell you about them. They were all followers of a SAD. None were on any kind of a diet regimen. None were paleo. None were vegan. None were keto, low carb, or Atkins. They were regular SAD followers. They were not restrained eaters, so none were on a caloric restriction. No diets going on here. All but a couple were insulin resistant. But because there was a couple, despite being overweight, that didn't have insulin resistance, they had normal insulin levels, they couldn't say, and were insulin resistance. They had to say, and may have been. They were given a test load comprised of either sugar or sucralose in solid or beverage form. And this was called phase 1 of the study. Phase 1 is relevant. I'm going to come back to this in a minute because you need to know what phase 1 means. But it's for 15 seconds, a solid or beverage form that they had to chew or swish around, and it was either sugar or sucralose. Interesting, this is good. And this was after, by the way, this was after 8 hours of fasting. Participants were classified as responders. Key word, as responders. They were classified as responders if they demonstrated a positive insulin response. In other words, if their insulin went above baseline, which was established just prior to them getting their first sham feed. Now, your question needs to be, participants were classified as responders. Well, what if they weren't responders? How many were responders? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. Okay, here's the breakdown of this study. Notice across the top, all 64 people did all 4 tests. Low-cal beverage, 64 did it. Notice the difference between responders and non-responders. 25 responders, 39 non-responders. How come no one talks about this? This study gets thrown around all the time to prove sucralose has a CPIR effect, and yet the difference, just so you know, if you do the math on that, is exactly 46. That's not exact. It's damn close to 40-60. So in this most metabolically compromised section of the U.S. population, obese, overweight or obese, followers of a SAD, non-calorie restricted, with insulin resistance, which, as you know, is synonymous with prediabetes, barely 40% had a cephalic response to sucralose. All right, let that sink in. That means 60% in this most compromised section of unhealthy people, 60% didn't. Oh, how come no one's talking about that? That pisses me. I mean, that triggers me. That we're focusing on the 40%. And everyone who uses this study, Dr. Barry, Dr. Berg, Thomas DeLauer, Jen Stevens, all make this study sound like it's universal. You have something with sweet taste. Never mind the fact that it's strictly sucralose, but you have something sweet, touch your tongue, touch your taste buds. You are going to have an insulin response. I call bullshit. Right? Anyway. Woo! I'm getting hot. Getting fired up. Okay, 40% were responders. Now, the story doesn't end here. Because you remember I mentioned that there was multiple phases. So they took this group of 40% of the 25 responders, and they gave them phase 2, which was training. Notice, during phase 2, participants underwent a 2-week training period to facilitate associative learning between sensory properties of the test load, right, of the sucralose, of the sugar, etc., and their post-ingestive effects. So they taught them about CPIR. Right? Talk about cool. Taught them about CPIR. Gave them something like sugar-free gum. And for 2 weeks said, understand the mind-body connection. We're going to give you sugar-free gum. It's going to have a sweet taste, but there's going to be 0 calories. Let's see if we can teach your body not to expect calories, right? Obviously, if only 40% had it, Dr. Fung calls CPIR a learned response, an environmental learned response, which means they're hoping to prove here it can be unlearned. It can be trained out of you. So let me ask you something. Here's a skill testing question. Best guess. It's not a skill testing question. It's a best guess. If 40%, if 25 of the 64 had a cephalic response to sucralose after 2 weeks of chewing sugar-free gum, how many do you think of the 40%, percentage-wise, had a cephalic response after training? So obviously there was a phase 3 where participants, the 40%, right, were retested for their cephalic phase responses as in phase 1. Obviously that would be phase 3. It had to be a retest. There was no CPIR after training. After 2 weeks. 2 weeks! How come we're not talking about that? How come we're not talking about, well, you were a SAD follower, you had a 40% chance of having a CPIR, but once you know about it and you understand it and you start eating healthy and you do keto, Atkins, low carb, or you start fasting and you start dropping your glucose and your insulin, the chances are 0 that you have a cephalic response to aspartame, which has no response ever in anybody, including SAD followers, but this 40% in sucralose goes away. Every one of you, when you get a question about what can I have when I'm fasting, should be saying, go buy yourself some pure straight sucralose drops. Drop that in your bulletproof coffee like Coach Mike does. Bob's your uncle. 0 insulin response. I'm hoping I see more of that. I'm hoping this video gets out there in the fasting groups. Share it, by the way. If you're watching this video, you should share this video. That's all I can say. From the authors of the study, notice their last line in conclusion: we cannot characterize the sucralose effect of CPIR on CPIR as robust. Well, it's funny because everyone who quotes this study makes it damn well sound robust. Based on our observations in this trial, it observed only in a subset of obese, overweight, SAD followers who were insulin resistant, aka pre-diabetic, who weren't on any diet regimen, weren't fasting, and was not reliably reproduced. In fact, not reliably, 0. None. 0 CPIR after 2 weeks. Oh, God, this study. Anyway, I don't know what Althea thought she was proving by sharing this study. Maybe she didn't read it. That's all I can think of, because if anybody took the time to read this study, they would damn well know you can't use it. You can't use it because only 40% of SAD followers had a response. Okay. Study number 3 is another controlled trial reported on in the journal Appetite from 2008. Althea likes this one because it does have cephalic phase insulin release in the title, in healthy humans after taste stimulation. Off to a good start. Sounds good. Oh, and under the first words I highlighted, under fasting conditions. So this is applicable on both counts. Okay, CPIR in fasting conditions. Healthy humans sipped and washed their mouths with 8 solutions. 8. Awesome. This is good. Sugar, sucrose is sugar. Saccharin, we already know saccharin has a CPIR, so that's interesting. Acetic acid, sodium chloride, quinine hydrochloride, distilled water, starch, and sodium glutamate for 45 seconds and spat them out. A significant increase, here we go, a plasma insulin concentration was apparent after stimulation with, just as we suspected, sugar and saccharin. In conclusion, the current data suggests that the sweeteners sucrose and saccharin activated CPIR when applied to the oral cavity. Notice 2 out of 8. Remember, 8 taste solutions Acetic acid, sodium chloride, quinine hydrochloride, distilled water, starch, and sodium glutamate, no response. 2 out of 8, that's 25%. 25%, and we knew about them. We know about sucrose and saccharin. I learned nothing from this study. Yes, it was applicable because of our 2 qualifiers, our 2 caveats, but this didn't prove nothing. I don't know what Althea thinks she's proving with this one. All right, study number 4, relationship between insulin and taste. This one is in the journal Biomedical Research from, do you see the year? 2007. Okay, so we're going back a bit, but nonetheless, we use I don't give a crap about this study already. We used female Worcester rats, 5 basic taste stimuli: sugar, sodium chloride, HCI, quinine, and MSG, monosodium glutamate. It's relevant, but it's in rats, and there's no need for that anymore. This is not something that requires test in rats. Just go grab any people and have them fast for 12 hours, and you can test. So I really have no faith in rat and mouse studies, but we'll have a look and see what happens here. Remember, so there's 5 flavors, of which one is sugar. Not one single non-cal sweetener. Not one single sucralose, aspartame, stevia, erythritol, monk. This is a useless study. It really is. Rats reliably exhibited CPIR to sugar. No shit, Sherlock. All right. Sodium chloride, HCI, quinine, and MSG did not elicit CPIR. Thank you. 1 out of 5. Again, what's that? 20%. The non-nutritive sweetener saccharin. Oh, wait, by the way, the next line was the non-nutritive sweetener saccharin elicited ICPR. A, we know that. We know all about saccharin. Thank you very much. But B, how'd you know? You didn't test it on the rats. Anyway. Let's move on to study number 5. Sugar-induced cephalic phase insulin response is mediated by a T1R2 and T1R3 independent taste transduction pathway in mice. God, I don't care. We studied the contribution of the sweet taste receptor to sugar. I'm going to skip this one. A, it's in mice. B, it has to do with sugar. There's no arguing sugar. We never talk about when we fast. We never talk about, can I have sugar when I fast? I have not one time in the 10 years I've been keto, Atkins, low carb, in fact, more than that, since like 1993 off and on. But in the last decade, no one's never in social media got into a fasting group and said, hey, can I put a teaspoon of sugar in my coffee and still think I'm fasting? Right? Oh my God, the collective response would be, you're an idiot. Study number 6 that Althea quoted was this one here from the journal Diabetologia, which I think is either a journal in Spain or Italy, one of the two. But nonetheless, cephalic phase, reflex insulin secretion, neuroanatomical and physiological characterization. I can already see the word Worcester. Yep, male Worcester rats. We have shown that the sweet taste of a saccharin solution. No shit. I like it. All right, CPIR in the absence of any significant change of glycemia. Right, so because saccharin has 0 calories, 0 carbs, there is no change to glucose. There is, though, a change in insulin, which is what we had talked about and we agreed to. That's why none of you use saccharin, right? I hope not. A study in the International Journal of Obesity out of the UK. The title was Effects of Aspartame, Monk Fruit, Stevia, and Sucrose, sugar, sweetened beverages on postprandial. Shoot. I don't know why Althea sent this. Again, the argument or the debate, it wasn't an argument, but the discussion between Asia and Althea was about, do non-nutritive sweeteners break a fast? A, you have to be fasting, and B, postprandial is not fasting. Postprandial is after food. All right, let's have a look. Let's see what this one has to say. The objectives, the study compared the effects of consuming non-nutritive sweeteners, artificial versus natural, and sugar. 65 grams of sugar, holy, on energy intake, blood glucose, and insulin responses. So what does the background say? Substituting sweeteners for non-nutritive may aid in glycemic control. Really? It may aid. That's good to know. May aid in glycemic control and body weight management. Let's have a look and see what this one's about. It has nothing to do with fasting. It's irrelevant, but we'll have a look. 30 healthy males took part in a randomized crossover study with 4 treatments: aspartame, monk, stevia, and sugar. This is a good one. 3 good non-nutritive sweeteners: aspartame, monk, stevia, and sugar. On each test day, participants were asked to consume a standard breakfast in the morning, and I can tell you about that in a second, and they were provided with a test beverage, again, as a preload, and ad libitum lunch. So what they wanted to see was, is there a difference, again, talking about amount of food you eat, if they just put a buffet in front of you and said, eat to your heart's content, but an hour before you had a preload of either aspartame, stevia, monk, or sugar, would there be a difference in your lunch? Let's have a look. Completely different topic. I just want to say one more time, this has nothing to do with the topic at hand. Again, I don't know what Althea is doing. Maybe she just thought, I'm just going to bombard Asia with 10, 12, 15 links, and maybe she'll just get pissed off and think, okay, Althea must be right because she just fed me 10 studies. And so the overwhelming, I don't know, would most of you take the time to go and look at all 10 studies like I am? Probably not, which is why I'm happy to do it. The energy saved, here we go. So the energy saved from having the non-nutritive sweeteners, from replacing sucrose with non-nutritive sweeteners, was fully compensated for at subsequent meals. Hence, no difference in daily energy intake was found between the treatments. That's exactly the opposite. Remember that previous study where it was either 290 as a preload or 490, and they maintained a 200 calorie difference. This study of this group found that wasn't the case. These men made up for the difference. Now, that just means that at the end of the day, they were no further ahead, but they got to eat more food, right? I personally think that's okay. I would prefer that. If I got to eat more food by having a sugar-free Monster or a Diet Coke as a preload, and then I could go have another 200 calories of food, that to me is a win. So that just leaves the 3 articles, which we'll touch on now. I do want to say, great information though. I mean, to Althea's credit, we learned some really good stuff here. We learned that the insulin and glucose response with food. So if you have, here's what you need to, as a takeaway. If you're having carbs, and along with those carbs, you're having a Diet Coke or a sugar-free Monster or an ice beverage or stevia in your coffee. So let's say, for example, you go to Dairy Queen. If you're having a refeed meal and you go to Dairy Queen, I still recommend this. Just be aware of it. And you have a burger and fries along with a Diet Pepsi or a Diet Coke. You can expect that your glucose response and your insulin response will be at least as high as if you had a regular Coke. Right? So that's the takeaway from these studies that on the postprandial front. That's what I learned from this, that I still recommend that. I don't think it matters that your insulin is as high. Again, we're not talking about chronic or pathologically high insulin. We're talking about very short, very acute, in line with a meal in your feeding window. Who cares? I eat in a 6-hour window most days, between 4 and 6. And so in that window, I don't care if my insulin is spiked the entire time because I've got somewhere between 18 and 20 hours of fasting with ultra low, bottomed out glucose and insulin. So I'm less concerned. You have to decide your level of concern, but that definitely is a takeaway from Althea's studies. What I didn't learn, not one piece of evidence here suggests that any of the artificial sweeteners or non-cal sweeteners outside of saccharin, the devil, should be avoided during a fast. My goodness, I can't find a single study in 10 years of looking on aspartame that shows a cephalic and insulin response. So let's get after these 3 studies and see if there's any takeaways. And we're going to start with that one down at the bottom of the list of the 3 from health.harvard.edu. Here it comes. Okay, so my screen is beside me to the left here. The camera's in front, so if you see the side profile of my face, you'll know why. Harvard Health Publishing has a question here. Ask the doctor, do artificial sweeteners cause insulin resistance? Hey, that's a great topic. Not the topic at hand. Insulin resistance has nothing to do with whether you're fasting and if there's a cephalic response. But do artificial sweeteners show or cause insulin resistance? I see a packet of Splenda and a packet of Sweet and Low. All right, let's have a look. I've heard that artificial sweeteners increase the risk of developing insulin resistance, or IR. Is that true? Are some types worse than others? You can see here that you got to buy this. I should do that. I should sign up and buy this. But nonetheless, this was Althea's link. She shared this with Asia. You've asked a question scientists are working to understand or to answer. Studies of artificial sweeteners are mixed, with some indicating that people use them to eat fewer calories and lose weight and maintain a stable weight. Yeah, that's my conjecture. However, in a few studies, artificial sweeteners were associated with weight gain. And just so you know, those studies, if you take the time to look them up, and I recommend you do, it was because of that overcompensation we talked about in the last study, where people felt that because they were ingesting artificial sweeteners, they could overcompensate with calories, which might increase the risk of developing insulin. Sure. Notice this. All right, so artificial sweeteners are associated with weight gain. Now, weight gain might increase the risk of developing insulin resistance, a condition in which the body's cells do not respond properly to insulin and thus cannot easily absorb 100%. But what they're saying here, be careful, weight gain is associated with IR, right? The fact that artificial sweeteners may be associated or may have a correlation, not causal, but a correlation with weight gain doesn't mean that they're causing the IR. It's the weight gain because there's thousands, if not millions of people like you and I who enjoy artificial sweeteners or non-cal sweeteners, be it monk, erythritol, or stevia, or aspartame or sucralose, and still lose weight. right? So this is by no means causal. In fact, and again, going back to our two caveats of is it fasting and does it show a cephalic response? Neither. I'm going to move on. Removing energy from a beverage influences later food intake more than the same energy addition. Again, we're talking about postprandial, right? If it influences later food intake, we're talking about postprandial with food. So at the time of taking a beverage that's non-cal, right? We're removing energy from a beverage, means a non-energy based beverage. Could that result in more food later? Sure. If you're not careful, if you're not like you and I and not tracking, if you're not using Carb Manager or Chronometer or MyFitnessPal to make sure you're in a caloric deficit. If you get to eat ad libitum is the term, right? To your choice is how much you eat until you're stuffed, that you do run the risk of overeating. Let's have a quick look. The abstract, designing reduced calorie foods. Although research has demonstrated that compensation for overfeeding is relatively limited, I bet it is, the extent to which energy reductions trigger adjustments in later food is less clear. The current study tested satiety responses to convert 200 cal reduction and an addition of maltodextrin. I'm done. Maltodextrin, that's worse than sugar. That's worse than glucose. That is a higher 106 on the glycemic index compared to pure dextrose and glucose, which are 100. Anyway, 29 healthy participants were recruited to consume 3 soy milk, even soy milk. Oh, this study is awful. I don't know why Althea included it, especially in the discussion she was having with Asia about fasting and what breaks a fast. These adjustments accounted for 40% of the energy removed from the soy milk and 30% added in. No further adjustments were noted for the rest of the day. Well, you know, this actually shows that they didn't even eat all the calories that they saved. If someone had the LE, which is 100 calories compared to the 305, and then it says later these adjustments accounted for 40% of the energy removed, or 40, I don't know how to make sense of that in a hurry without reading more, but it sounds like they didn't even make up for the calories. They're still in a deficit. God bless! I love this study. I'm going to use this study because they didn't complete the gap of calories according to this. All right, and the last link that Althea shared was in Healthline. Do artificial sweeteners raise insulin levels? This might be relevant. Let's have a look at this one. Studies on artificial sweeteners and insulin have shown mixed results. Sucralose. Both animal and human studies have suggested a link between sucralose ingestion and raised insulin levels. In one study, 17 people were given either sucralose or water and then administered a glucose tolerance test. This is also with food. So a glucose tolerance test, if you look this up and read this study, I have read this study in the past, and I know that they gave them a beverage with sucralose and then administered a 75 gram. By the way, a glucose tolerance test, Google this, is 75 grams of glucose. Think about that. 75 grams of sugar in a liquid, down that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to check your glucose, your response to glucose and insulin in response to 75 grams of sugar. Now, guess what they said? Those given the sucralose had 20% higher blood insulin levels. So here's just to put this in perspective. My resting fasted insulin level is 4.1. I can't remember the millimole per deciliter. I can't remember the acronym, but anyway, mine's 4.1. So let's suppose for a second I down this 75 grams of glucose. And let's say my insulin level doubles. Let's say it goes up by a factor of 100% and I have a spike and I go from 4.1 to 8.2. Now it says it went up by 20% more. So 20% more of that gap, another 4.1 times 20%, is just about another 1%. So instead of my insulin going from 4.1 to 8.2, it now goes to 9.2, maybe 9.3. You know something? I don't know that I care. Again, it's in my feeding window. But that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. This study did not prove a cephalic response, nor did it prove anything while fasting. It showed it in response to 75 grams of sugar. Aspartame. Aspartame is perhaps the most well-known. However, studies have not linked aspartame with raised insulin levels. And of these two studies, one was postprandial, one was fasting. All right? In fact, I quote this one in my aspartame video where I show 9 studies, none of which show an insulin response in any way, shape, or form to aspartame. Well, this one helps me. Thank you, Althea. Studies have not linked aspartame with insulin levels being raised. Saccharin, well, we know about saccharin, but nonetheless, one study found that mouthwashing with saccharin solution without swallowing caused insulin. We know it. Aspartame potassium. One study looked at injecting large amounts of ACE-K, massive increase in rats. ACE-K can increase insulin in rats. However, the effect on humans is unknown. All right, summary. What did they say? The effect of artificial sweeteners on insulin level seems to be variable depending on the type. Yeah. So why is everyone selling it like it happens? Jump any day into a fasting forum and I watch people say artificial sweeteners spike insulin. They don't. Honestly, every day I read this, and every day I'm like, God, which artificial sweetener are you talking about? Because it depends on the sweetener. Sucralose appears to influence insulin levels by triggering receptors in the mouth. However, again, they refer to that study that I showed you today on SAD followers. That's where this comment comes from. Not anyone healthy, not anyone Atkins, low carb, keto, or fasting. However, few high-quality human trials exist, and it's currently unclear whether other artificial sweeteners have the same effect. Love it. Love it. Hey, Althea, thank you. I just confirmed everything I knew. That was a great study. That's a great article. I'm glad we looked at these three because none of them say anything conclusively about the topic at hand. And if anything, I took away some pointers, i.e., again, it confirmed that aspartame is okay. It confirmed that not all artificial sweeteners have an effect, and therefore they should not all be lumped together. And that here it says if you eat them as part of a balanced diet, there is no strong evidence you should stop. Hey, listen, folks, on that note, I hope you got some information out of this. Thank you. Thank you again to Asia for forwarding me this conversation. I won't go so far as to say debate. It really wasn't. You can tell when I read through the links that she sent me through their conversation, it was very cool. Althea is very classy, and Asia right back. Right, so this was a good discussion of what have you got. I'd like to see something, and then she was kind enough to forward to me so I could have a look as well and give you my thoughts. So on that note, again, great questions like this one turn into videos just like this one. If I said anything or you found anything intriguing and want me to follow up, please do drop a comment down below. And if you haven't yet, after all that, I hope you've subscribed, and do me a favor, punch that like button. All right, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the video, and hey, on that note, thanks for your time. I appreciate you being patient. I'll see you in the next one.